Everyone heard the laughter at the neighborhood barbecue, but no one saw the look in Karen's eyes. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her face, a mask she wore when she thought no one was paying attention. My daughter was sitting on the picnic bench, her curls bouncing as she giggled with her friends. She had just turned 16, full of energy, full of life, finally stepping into that age where every moment feels like a chance to belong. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the lawn. Kids were running around with sparklers, parents balancing plates of potato salad and ribs. To anyone passing by, it looked like a perfect small-town scene, but something about the air felt tense. And I couldn't shake the way Karen, the HOA president, kept circling like a hawk. She had always made her disapproval of us clear. From the day we moved into that neighborhood, it was as if our presence unsettled her. She had rules, unspoken ones, that everyone else seemed to obey. She didn't like newcomers. She didn't like anyone who didn't play her game. And tonight I realized she had plans. I saw her glance at cup, just a simple red plastic cup of soda on the table. Karen's manicured hand hovered, too long, too casual. And then she looked around, making sure no one was watching. My breath caught. I froze, my plate forgotten. What was she doing? But then she pulled her hand back quickly when another neighbor walked past. The soda sat there untouched, but something inside me whispered, "Don't drink that." And here's the part that still chills me. I didn't move. I doubted myself. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. After all, who would ever think that someone from the neighborhood association, someone who claimed to care about community, would do something to a teenager's drink at a summer barbecue? But Karen, she wasn't like other people. A few minutes later came running back to the table, laughing with her friend Sarah. She reached for her cup. My heart hammered in my chest. Should I stop her? Should I say something? Should I cause a scene in front of everyone? The music from the speakers grew louder, drowning my thoughts. Neighbors raised their glasses. Someone shouted for another round of burgers, and in the middle of all that chaos, lifted the cup to her lips. That's when I saw it. Karen across the lawn holding her wine glass, staring directly at my daughter. That smile again, sharp, cold, almost satisfied. The soda was halfway to his mouth. I felt my entire body tense. I stood up so fast my chair nearly tipped over. Oh, wait. Everyone turned to look at me. Forks paused. Conversations fell silent, and blinked, confused, her hand frozen in midair. "Don't drink that," I said, my voice lower now, trembling but firm. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. My neighbors' faces shifted from curiosity to discomfort. Karen tilted her head, eyebrows raised, pretending to be surprised. "What's wrong?" asked, lowering the cup slowly. And in that instant, I knew two things. One, if I said what I suspected, people would think I was crazy, paranoid, maybe even drunk. And two, if I stayed silent, something far worse might happen. The world seemed to hold its breath. I took the cup from my daughter's hand. My eyes never left Karen's. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about rules or HOA fines or noisy teenagers. This was a war, one she had started long before tonight. But she had no idea who she was really messing with. Because while she thought she was playing a game with a family she could bully, what she didn't know was that's father, my husband, wasn't just another neighbor. He was the district attorney. And he had been watching her too. Everyone thought I was overreacting, but then why was Karen trembling when my husband stood up? The crowd had gone awkwardly quiet, the way it does when something doesn't fit into the script of a sunny neighborhood barbecue. Laughter had stopped, forks hovered in midair, kids stared, not sure whether to keep running around with their sparklers or freeze like the adults. Still looked at me like I had embarrassed her in front of the entire town. And maybe I had. But when my husband, Michael, set down his glass of iced tea and calmly rose from his seat, the entire energy shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He simply walked over, his presence heavy enough to silence even the boldest HOA chatter. "Mind if I see that cup?" he asked me. His tone was soft, but there was an edge to it that only people who knew him well would catch. I handed it to him. His eyes scanned the liquid, then flicked to Karen across the lawn. She smiled, too wide, her pearls catching the last light of the sunset. "What's this about?" she asked sweetly, tilting her head as if the entire situation were some silly misunderstanding. "Surely you're not suggesting I—" Michael didn't answer her. Instead, he raised the cup to his nose, sniffed, and frowned. Neighbors exchanged looks. Whispers buzzed like gnats. Some shook their heads, muttering under their breath. Others leaned closer, curiosity painted across their faces. "What is it, Dad?" whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael didn't answer her either. He simply said, "Let's step aside." He handed the cup to a friend of his from the sheriff's department who just happened to be there that night. And suddenly, it was no longer just a family barbecue. It was an investigation. Karen laughed, too high-pitched, too forced. "Oh, for heaven's sake, are we really turning this into some kind of courtroom drama? It's a soda. A soda, Michael." But her hands betrayed her. They clutched her glass too tightly. Her knuckles whitened. And the strangest thing was how no one came to her defense. That's the thing about people like Karen. They thrive on control, on making everyone else feel small. But when the tide turns, when the curtain rips open, suddenly the empire of fear they built starts to crumble. And the people who once obeyed them, they stay quiet. I watched my daughter's face pale as she realized this wasn't paranoia. It wasn't some overprotective mother embarrassing her in front of the neighbors. It was real. But the real nightmare hadn't even begun yet. The sheriff's deputy held the cup, his brow furrowing as he pulled out his phone to make a quick call. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew exactly what he was asking for. A quick test, a lab, a sample. Karen stepped forward, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. What are you all staring at me for? Do you honestly believe I would, what, slip something into a child's drink? Are you all mad?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. And then came the silence. Not one neighbor defended her. Not one voice said, "Of course not, Karen, we know you'd never." That silence was louder than anything. Michael finally spoke, his voice steady, quiet, deliberate. "Karen, you're welcome to explain yourself, but I suggest you wait until the sheriff's office has completed their analysis." Her lips tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The mask cracked for just a moment, and beneath it was something darker. Hatred. She wasn't scared, not really, she was furious. Because for the first time in years, someone had stood up to her in front of everyone. And worse, she couldn't spin the story. Not with Michael there, not with the deputy holding that cup. I took his hand, squeezing it tight. She squeezed back, her fingers trembling. She finally understood why I had leapt up, why I had stopped her. But part of me still wondered, what if I had been too late? The deputy excused himself to his car, carrying the cup like evidence. Neighbors began drifting back to their tables, murmuring quietly. Some looked at us with sympathy. Others avoided our eyes altogether, afraid of getting dragged into the storm. Karen stood alone. And that was the first crack in her kingdom. But it wasn't the end, not even close. That night after we got home, went straight to her room without a word. Michael and I sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. He rubbed his temples. "You were right," he said finally. "I saw it too." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "So what happens now?" He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the table. "That depends on what the lab finds." And then softer, almost to himself. "But either way, she's made a mistake she can't walk back." I thought about Karen's face, that flicker of rage when she realized she'd lost control. And I knew this wasn't over, not for us, not for. Because people like Karen don't surrender. They don't admit defeat. They come back harder, meaner, desperate. And as I turned out the kitchen light that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was waiting for us around the corner. Everyone thought the test would clear everything up. But when the results came back, the neighborhood would never look at Karen the same way again. The phone rang the next morning, far too early for comfort. Michael was already up, standing by the kitchen window with his coffee, staring out like he was waiting for the day to reveal its secrets. When he answered, his tone shifted instantly, professional, clipped, the way it did when he was on duty. I held my breath, wandered in, still in pajamas, rubbing her eyes, unaware of how much weight that call carried. Michael nodded slowly, listening. His face hardened the way it only did when the truth was worse than expected. Finally, he said, "Thank you, secure the report, I'll come by shortly." He hung up. For a long moment he didn't speak. "What did they find?" I whispered. His eyes flicked to, then back to me. "Not now," he said softly, but was sharper than he gave her credit for. "Dad, tell us." He sighed, setting the mug down with a dull thud. "They found traces of benzodiazepines in the cup." The words hit the air like stones. "Blinked benzo what?" I swallowed hard. "Sedatives, something meant to make you drowsy." Her lips parted, her hand trembling on the countertop. "You mean, if I had drunk?" Michael cut her off. "You didn't, that's what matters." But his jaw was tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. His eyes brimmed with tears. She wanted to hurt me. And that's when it sank in. This wasn't some petty power move. This was Karen slapping fines on our mailbox for being the wrong shade of beige. This was criminal. This was dangerous. But Karen wasn't in handcuffs, not yet. Michael went into work that morning with the report in hand. I watched him leave, shoulders squared, his entire body radiating quiet fury. He wasn't just a father now. He was the district attorney, and someone had targeted his family. But in a neighborhood like ours, news traveled faster than wildfire. By noon, whispers were racing down the cul-de-sacs, traded over hedges and driveways. Some people believed it. Some didn't. Some were too afraid to take sides. And then came the letter. It arrived that afternoon, slid under our front door like something secret and shameful. I picked it up, my stomach twisting the moment I recognized the neat, controlled handwriting. It was Karen's. "You are making a mistake. Drop this before it ruins you. Families don't last when they pick the wrong battles." No signature, no apology, no denial. Just a threat dressed as advice. I crumpled the paper in my hand, my skin crawling. When came down and saw my face, she asked, "What is it?" I shook my head quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But inside, I was burning. Michael came home late that night, his expression unreadable. He kissed her forehead, told her to sleep well, and waited until her door closed before handing me another envelope. "This is the official report," he said. "Filed and sealed, she won't get away with this." But there was doubt in his eyes. Because technically it wasn't enough. There were no fingerprints, no cameras, no eyewitnesses who would testify. All we had was suspicion, her proximity, and that sickening smile. And Karen knew it. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday night. Against my instincts, Michael insisted we go. "We can't hide," he said. "That's exactly what she wants." So we went. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, its beige walls lined with motivational posters about community and unity. How ironic. The room was packed, neighbors whispering in hushed tones, eyes darting toward us as we walked in. Karen sat at the front table, gavel in hand, pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. She looked calm, too calm. "Welcome, everyone," she said smoothly, as if nothing at all had happened. "Let's begin." For the first 30 minutes it was business as usual. Lawn violations, pool maintenance, parking disputes. But every word was poisoned by the tension in the room. Everyone was waiting for it. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. And then halfway through, Karen finally leaned forward. "I'd like to address a disturbing rumor circulating through our community," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "It seems some individuals have accused me of tampering with a child's drink, a ridiculous, hurtful, and frankly slanderous claim." Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to us. Michael didn't flinch. He simply leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, letting her talk. Karen smiled thinly. "I can assure you nothing of the sort happened, but it seems our neighbors enjoy drama. and who better to stir it than a district attorney's family looking for attention? The room buzzed. Some shook their heads, some avoided eye contact. But then an older woman in the back spoke up. "I saw you by that table, Karen. You were near the girl's cup." The room went still. Karen's smile cracked. "Excuse me." Another neighbor spoke. "I saw it too. You reached toward it. Don't pretend you didn't." Murmurs grew louder. For the first time, Karen's control was slipping. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Michael finally leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. "We have a toxicology report. The evidence doesn't lie, and neither will the testimony of witnesses." Karen's eyes flashed, that fury returning, raw and unmasked. "You're making a mistake, Michael," she hissed, her voice low, but the microphone carried it through the room. "You think you're untouchable, but families break, daughters stray, and power doesn't last forever." Her words were venom, a promise, not a threat. And for the first time that night, I realized this wasn't about winning a petty neighborhood squabble anymore. This was survival. And Karen wasn't finished. Everyone thought it would end at the meeting, but that was only the beginning. The night after Karen's mask slipped in front of the entire neighborhood, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the soft creaks of the house settling, my mind replaying her words over and over. Families break, daughters stray. It wasn't just a threat, it was a strategy. She wasn't going to come after us through the courts or the HOA rules anymore. She was going to go for the one place she knew she could hurt us most, our daughter. The first sign came the next morning. Walked into the kitchen, her phone in hand, her face pale. "Mom," she whispered, "someone posted about me." She handed me her phone. It was a post on a neighborhood group chat, anonymous, but written in that same clipped, condescending style I'd seen in Karen's letters. Parents should know what their teenagers are really up to. Some of them aren't as innocent as they look. Some of them bring shame into our community. Attached was a blurry photo of at the barbecue, laughing with her friends, soda in her hand. The caption, "Is this the kind of behavior we tolerate?" My stomach turned. His voice cracked. "Why are they saying this about me? I didn't do anything." I hugged her, but my arms felt useless against the weight pressing down on her. This was exactly what Karen wanted, to make doubt herself, to make her feel small, dirty, exposed. Michael came downstairs just as stormed off to her room. He read the post, his jaw tightening. "She's escalating," he muttered. I nodded, tears threatening. "She's trying to break her." And it worked. At school, whispers followed down the hall. Friends who had giggled with her days before now avoided eye contact. Someone slipped a note into her locker with one word scrawled across it. "Slut." She crumpled it up, but I saw her hands shaking. She stopped eating lunch at the cafeteria. She spent hours locked in her room, the glow of her phone lighting her face as she scrolled through comment after cruel comment. Karen didn't just poison her drink, she poisoned her reputation. And in a small town, reputation is everything. One night I found crying in her room, her face buried in her pillow. "Why does she hate me?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything to her." I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair back gently. "Because you're happy, sweetheart, because you're good, and people like her can't stand the light. It reminds them of everything they've lost." But inside, my heart was breaking. I wanted to protect her from every whisper, every cruel glance, every shadow Karen cast over her life. But I couldn't be everywhere. I couldn't fight every battle. And Michael, he was growing more restless by the day. He was careful not to let his anger show around, but I could see it simmering just beneath the surface. He'd spend late nights in his office, poring over case files, his phone buzzing with calls from investigators. Then one evening, he finally said it out loud. "She's not going to stop, not until she feels powerful again." I stared at him across the kitchen table. "So what do we do?" He leaned forward, his voice low, controlled. "We build a case. The drink, the toxicology, the threats, the posts. We connect the dots. And when the time is right, we make sure she answers for every single thing she's done." It sounded good, strong, righteous. But all I could think about was her tired eyes, her slumped shoulders. How much longer could she endure this? And then came the second letter. This one wasn't slid under our door. It was mailed in an envelope with no return address. But inside was no note, just a photo. Taken from a distance, walking home from school. My blood ran cold. When I showed it to Michael, his face darkened in a way I had never seen before. He held the photo carefully, as though it might shatter under the weight of his grip. "She's watching her," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just folded the photo neatly, slid it into a folder with the others, and locked it in his desk. But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just about winning anymore. This was personal. The next day, he walked to school himself. For the first time in years, the other parents looked at us not with polite indifference, but with unease. They knew something was happening. They just didn't know how deep it went. Karen wasn't at the drop-off that morning, but I knew she'd be somewhere, watching, smiling, waiting for her next move. And that night, as the three of us sat at dinner, barely touching her food, Michael finally broke the silence. "She's going to slip," he said. "People like her always do, and when she does, I'll be ready." But his words didn't comfort me, because in the back of my mind, a darker thought whispered. What if she dragged us down with her before that day came? Everyone thought the photo was the worst of it, but that was only Karen's opening move. The air in our house grew heavy in the days that followed, barely spoke at dinner anymore. She went from a bubbly, laughing teenager to a girl who kept her curtains closed and jumped whenever the doorbell rang. I tried to convince her to go out with her friends, but she always shook her head. "What if she's there?" she'd whisper. Michael was restless too, packing the living room at night, his phone buzzing with updates from investigators. He never said much in front of, but I knew he was collecting every scrap of evidence, building something bigger than just an HOA dispute. And then it happened. Had a debate competition after school, something she'd been preparing for all semester. She begged us not to come, afraid our presence would draw more whispers. Michael reluctantly agreed, but I could tell it broke his heart to let her face the crowd alone. So we stayed home. But halfway through the evening my phone rang. It was friend Sarah, her voice frantic. "You need to come now, something's happening." Michael and I were out the door in seconds. By the time we reached the school, the auditorium was in chaos. Kids were shouting, teachers scrambling to restore order. And in the middle of it all stood frozen at the podium, her face pale, tears brimming in her eyes. Projected on the giant screen behind her was not the one she had prepared, not her carefully crafted debate notes. It was pictures. At the mall, laughing with her friends, eating lunch in the school cafeteria, every image clearly taken without her knowing. The final photo made my blood run cold. It was sleeping in her own bed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Teachers rushed to shut off the projector, but the damage was already done. Ran from the stage, her sobs echoing down the hallway. I chased after her, pulling her into my arms as she collapsed against me. "Mom, how did she get in my room?" she cried. I didn't have an answer. My chest ached with fear. Someone had been inside our home. Michael stormed into the principal's office, demanding answers, demanding to know how the system had been hijacked. But deep down, I already knew. Karen didn't need to break into our house herself. She had a way of pulling strings, of finding people desperate enough or weak enough to do her bidding. That night, Michael installed new locks, new cameras, a full security system. But no matter how many deadbolts he fastened, the truth was clear. Karen had already invaded our lives. And she wasn't stopping. The next HOA meeting was packed, the air thick with unease. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now leaned forward, whispering nervously as we walked in. Karen sat at the head of the table, her pearls gleaming, her smile wider than ever. "Well," she said smoothly, "I think we all saw quite a spectacle at the school last night. It's a shame when families can't keep their personal matters personal." Murmurs rippled. Some people looked at us with pity, others with doubt. That was her game, never a direct confession, never something you could pin down, just enough poison to corrode your reputation drop by drop. Michael's voice cut through the noise. "You crossed a line, Karen." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, Michael, always so dramatic. Are you suggesting I had something to do with a school prank?" Her laugh rang hollow, but her eyes told the truth. Cold, defiant, proud. And then she leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough that only those closest could hear. "You can put locks on your doors, cameras on your house, but it won't matter. You can't guard her forever. Girls wander. They make mistakes. And when they do—" Her smile sharpened. "They fall." I gripped Michael's arm, my heart pounding. He was seconds away from exploding. But that's exactly what she wanted. His anger, his loss of control, his reputation tarnished in front of everyone. Instead, he stood slowly, his voice steady. "Enjoy your power while it lasts, because soon everyone will see you for what you really are." Karen laughed, but it was too loud, too forced. Neighbors exchanged uneasy looks. A crack was forming. For the first time, they weren't just afraid of her, they were suspicious. And suspicion spreads like fire. That night, as we drove home, sat silently in the back seat, staring out the window. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently, lost in her own thoughts. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "we'll keep you safe, I promise." But she didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized Karen wasn't just trying to ruin's reputation. She was trying to break her spirit, to isolate her, to make her believe she was alone. It was a slow kind of violence, the kind you couldn't see on the skin, but that left scars just as deep. Later that night, Michael handed me a folder thick with papers. "I've got enough to move forward," he said, "but it's going to take time. She's careful, she's slippery." I stared at the folder, then at him. "Do we have that kind of time?" He didn't answer. Because the truth was, every day that Karen walked free was another day she could strike. And as I checked on sleeping, double-checking the locks, the cameras, the alarms, I couldn't shake the thought that haunted me. If Karen had already been inside once, what would stop her from coming back? Everyone thought Michael would snap first, but it was Karen who lost control. The morning after the at school, Michael was already dressed in his suit before sunrise. He didn't eat breakfast. He didn't even sip his coffee. He just stood at the counter, his briefcase in hand, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "I'm filing for a protective order," he said finally. His voice was low, steady, but there was fire underneath. For you, for the house. It won't stop her, but it'll put her on the radar legally. No more hiding behind whispers and HOA meetings." Sat at the table, staring at her untouched cereal. Her eyes were swollen from crying the night before. When she heard her father's words, she looked up for the first time. "Will it help?" she asked, her voice small. Michael paused, then knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. "It's the first step," he said softly. "But sweetheart, you have to promise me something. If anything feels wrong, if you see her near school, near the house, you tell us. Immediately." Nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was 16, old enough to know that paper alone doesn't stop monsters. That afternoon, Michael filed the paperwork. He came home with documents, copies of the toxicology report, screenshots of Karen's posts, even statements from 2 neighbors who had seen her near the drink at the barbecue. He was building a wall of evidence, brick by brick. But Karen was already digging tunnels underneath it. 2 days later, the mailman delivered another envelope. This one wasn't anonymous. It was on official HOA letterhead. Inside was a violation notice. "Unapproved surveillance equipment visible from the street. Fines will accumulate if not removed." I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. She was targeting our cameras, the very ones we'd installed to keep safe. Michael read it, then let out a humorless laugh. "She's using the HOA to strip away our defenses. Classic." He crumpled the notice and tossed it aside, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. That evening we sat together on the couch, watching the security feed flicker across the screen. Sat curled up between us, silent, and then movement. Across the street, a figure lingered under the lamppost. Too far for the cameras to catch a clear face, but the outline was unmistakable. Karen. She stood there for nearly 10 minutes, just watching. My skin crawled. Michael's hand tightened into a fist. She wants us to see her. She wants us to feel her shadow. Whimpered, pressing into me. That night, sleep didn't come. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow outside the window made my heart race. And then came the fire. It was 2 nights later. The smell hit me first, sharp, acrid, wrong. I bolted upright, rushing to the window. Our mailbox was in flames. Michael was already outside with the hose, dousing it before it could spread. Neighbors gathered in their pajamas, whispering, staring. And there, across the street, stood Karen again, arms folded, smile stretched wide. She didn't light the match herself. I knew that. She didn't have to. All she needed was someone desperate enough to do her bidding, but she wanted us to know it was her hand guiding the flame. The fire department came, filed a report, shook their heads. Could been kids messing around, one said casually. But Michael knew. I knew. The next morning, Michael drove straight to the courthouse. He came back that evening, his shoulders heavy but his eyes determined. She's cornered, he said, dropping his briefcase on the table. The protective order is moving forward. Once it's served, any contact, any presence within 100 feet becomes a violation. Looked up, a flicker of hope breaking through her exhaustion. So she'll have to stop. Michael hesitated. She'll have to change her tactics. That was the problem. People like Karen didn't stop. They adapted. They found new ways. And she proved it the very next day. Was walking home from school when a black SUV slowed beside her. The window rolled down and a voice called out. Careful who you trust, sweetheart. Not even your daddy can protect you forever. Froze, her pulse racing. She told me later she didn't see the driver's face, but she didn't need to. The message was clear. When she came through the front door, shaking and pale, Michael's fury erupted. He punched the wall so hard his knuckles bled. This ends now, he growled. But his anger scared almost as much as Karen's shadow. She flinched when he touched her shoulder. And that's when I realized Karen wasn't just attacking, she was tearing us apart from the inside, piece by piece. That night, as finally drifted to sleep, I stood at her doorway watching her breathe, and a thought hit me like ice. What if Karen wasn't just trying to break our family? What if she was trying to claim it? Everyone thought was strong enough to endure, but even the strongest souls can break when shadows never leave them. The morning after the SUV incident, she refused to go to school. She sat at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor as if the tiles might crack open and swallow her whole. I can't do it anymore, she whispered. Michael crouched in front of her, his voice gentle. Sweetheart, you don't have to face this alone. We're here, always. But shook her head. It doesn't matter, she's everywhere, at school, at the meetings, outside the house. Even when she's not there, I feel her watching me. Her words pierced me like knives. This was exactly what Karen wanted, to convince that there was no safe place left, not even within her own skin. Michael placed a hand over her trembling fingers. You are stronger than she is. You hear me? She feeds on fear, but fear is temporary, justice is forever. Sighs flickered with doubt. She didn't believe him, not yet. Later that day, the sheriff's deputy came by to serve the protective order. He handed Karen the papers right in front of her house, where she stood watering her roses as if nothing in the world could touch her. She smiled sweetly, glancing up toward our window where I stood watching. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply folded the papers, tucked them neatly under her arm, and went back to her roses. And that terrified me more than if she'd screamed. Because calm Karen was dangerous Karen. That night had a nightmare. I woke to her muffled screams and found her thrashing in bed, sobbing, Don't let her in, don't let her in. I held her until she quieted, stroking her hair, whispering that it was only a dream. But when I looked toward the window, I swore I saw a silhouette standing by the streetlight, watching. The next morning, Michael found something taped to our front door. Another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in neat, perfect handwriting. Locks only keep out those who knock. Saw it before I could hide it. Her face went white, and she ran back upstairs, slamming her door. Michael's fury was volcanic. He called the sheriff's office, demanded patrol cars, demanded protection. But all the deputy could say was, "We need her to cross the line. Once she violates the order, we can move." "She already has," Michael shouted, "but the law required patience, evidence, clear violations." And patience was the one thing we no longer had. That weekend vanished. It was a Saturday morning. She said she was going for a short walk just around the block. She needed air. She needed space. I hesitated, but she begged I just need to feel normal for a minute. So I let her go. 30 minutes passed, then an hour, my chest tightened. I called her phone, no answer. By the time Michael returned from the store, panic had set in. We jumped in the car, driving street after street, shouting her name, searching the park, the school, every corner of the neighborhood. And then we saw her. Was standing at the edge of the retention pond, her shoes half in the water. Her arms hung limp at her sides, her eyes vacant. I bolted from the car, my voice breaking. "Baby, what are you doing?" She turned slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't breathe, Mom. Everywhere I go, she's there. It's like she's already won." I grabbed her, pulling her into my arms. Michael wrapped us both up, his face a mask of anguish. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his voice trembling despite his strength. "She doesn't win, not like this. You are ours, you are loved, and she can't take that away." Sobbed against his chest, shaking, broken. We stayed there for nearly an hour, holding her, until the sun dipped lower and the cicadas sang in the trees. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." And that was the moment something shifted, not just in her but in all of us. We drove home in silence, and when we pulled into the driveway, Karen was standing there, pruning her roses again. She watched us with that same smug smile, as if she already knew what had happened. But Michael didn't flinch. He didn't shout, he didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, he looked at me, his voice calm but resolute. "It's time." That night, he gathered every folder, every photo, every letter. He called in favors, spoke to colleagues, outlined the case point by point. Karen thought she was untouchable because she played in the shadows, but Michael was about to drag her into the light. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that had been gone for weeks. Hope. But hope is fragile. And the next move Karen made would shatter whatever peace we thought we had left. Everyone thought Karen would never be caught, but evil always leaves fingerprints, even when it thinks it's wearing gloves. The night after's breakdown by the pond, the house was silent. Too silent. Michael worked late in his office, piecing together his evidence, every folder and photo spread across the desk like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. Slept in my bed, curled against me like she had when she was a child, her breath uneven, her body still trembling from weeks of fear. I couldn't sleep. My eyes kept darting toward the window, waiting for a shadow, a knock, a figure in the dark. But what came instead wasn't outside. It was inside. At 2:17 a.m., the alarm system shrieked. The front door. Michael bolted from his office, his voice sharp, commanding, "Stay with call 911. I clutched the phone, my hands shaking as I dialed. But before the dispatcher even answered, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering downstairs. Someone was inside. Michael's footsteps thundered down the hall. "Sheriff's deputies are on the way," I whispered into the phone, but my voice felt far away, like it belonged to someone else. And then I heard her. "Karen." Her voice floated up the stairs, calm, deliberate, almost sing-song. "You can't hide forever. Daddy can't protect you forever." My blood turned to ice. Michael's roar cut through the dark. "Karen, step away now." There was a crash, a scuffle, the sound of a chair toppling. I clutched as she jolted awake, her eyes wide with terror. "Is she here?" she whispered, her voice broken. I nodded, tears streaming down my cheeks. But this time she made a mistake. Red and blue lights flashed across the windows. Sirens wailed, closer, closer. Deputies stormed the house within minutes, their shouts filling the air. And when they dragged Karen out in handcuffs, Her perfect hair disheveled, her pearls askew, she still smiled. "I told you families break," she hissed, her voice venomous as she was shoved into the back of a cruiser. "She'll never be whole again, not after me." But for the first time, no one believed her. Neighbors lined the sidewalks in their robes and slippers, watching as the queen of their cul-de-sac was exposed for what she truly was. No more whispers, no more silence. The fear she had fed on for years dissolved in the flashing lights of justice. Michael stood at the curb, blood on his knuckles, sweat on his brow, but his shoulders than I'd ever seen. "She crossed the line," he told the deputies, "and now she answers for it." For weeks after her arrest, our house felt like a battlefield after the war. Quiet, scorched, but slowly light began to return. Started to smile again, hesitant at first, fragile like a bird testing broken wings. But day by day, the color came back to her cheeks. She laughed with Sarah again. She sat in the sun without glancing over her shoulder every 5 seconds. One evening, she came to me while I was cooking dinner. She slipped her arms around my waist and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore, Mom." And I believed her. Karen was charged with multiple offenses: breaking and entering, harassment, tampering. The toxicology report, the letters, the photos, the witness testimonies, they all stacked against her like a tower she could no longer climb. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding the gavel. But here's the thing about scars. They don't vanish just because the wound closes. Some nights still wakes with tears on her cheeks. Some mornings Michael still checks the locks 3 times before leaving for work. And me? I still catch myself staring at the roses Karen left behind in her yard, half expecting her to step out from behind them, smiling that same cruel smile. But then I remember the night of the arrest, the flashing lights, the neighbors watching, the look on her face when she saw Karen taken away. Relief, vindication, power returning to the place it had been stolen from. Sometimes justice doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't fix what was broken. But it gives you something else. It gives you back your breath, your voice, your right to stand in the sunlight without fear. And as I watch laugh again, hear her music spilling from her room, see her living without that constant shadow, I realize something Karen never understood. Families don't break because of darkness. They break when they stop fighting for one another. And no matter what Karen tried, no matter how many threats, lies, or shadows she threw at us, we never stopped fighting. And that's why, in the end, she lost.